tételt. És szóval ezt is már viszont mindig látják, hogy van dekopozíció, egyes társításnál viszont van szükségükkel. És akkor így van a magas sorsolás, a sorsolás, ez már ezeken a párosításokon csináljuk. És na, a course allocation-nel is ilyet csináltak, csak ez komplexebb, mert ott ugye csomókat. Is it time now?
No, I'm not interested in what you
Szóval, hogy a kurzus allocation-nel ugye egy csomagokat adják, és ezeket a csomagokat kezdik el állni, hol szükségeket kapnak. Tehát, hogy azt mondom, az szükség, hogy te megkapod a legjobb csomagot, amit kérsz, aztán jól szükség, hogy másrészt legjobb csomagot. És utána az egy kihívás, hogy ezt át kell fordítani egy ilyen sorsolásra, azért feasible meditable allocation, és ezt viszont már nem lehet, tehát ez nem lehet csinálni. De ez az előző meg is csinálták ezt, de szeretem. Tehát a és regisztrálni, és akkor például, hogy szerintem jó, de már legjobb volt, és mondták, már hogy se lehet volna ezt, de először
Right, I think we can make a start. This week we have Cyril from Paris here as featured guest, and we're very lucky to have him present matching with contracts. I give it to you.
Thank you all for being here today and to give me the opportunity to present my paper, Contract Term Monotonicity in Matching Markets. So contract terms are used in matching markets to design the relation between two agents that are matched. So for instance, for students and school, a contract term may represent the major chosen by a student at a given school, or the tuition fees that a student has to pay, or if she benefits from financial aid or not. For cadets in the US Army, it can represent the duration of the enrollment in the Army. And for doctors and hospital and worker and firm, it can represent the tasks that they have to do in the company, or if they work during the morning shift or the afternoon shift. And it can also represent their salaries. So basically, we can see that with these few examples, we can have transfer between agents in the markets. So it's a matching framework in which we can have them. And for the rest of the presentation, I will use the vocabulary of doctors and hospitals. And the main question that I address in this paper is, does offering more terms to doctors improve their welfare? So when they have more possible terms, more options, is it beneficial for doctors? And to answer this question, I study the impacts of adding and withdrawing some contract terms on the set of stable allocation and by extension on the welfare of them. So just to clarify, I said that an allocation is stable if there is no pair of agents, so doctors and hospitals, that have an incentive to leave their current match to be matched together. So we can interpret it as an equilibrium in the match. So the main motivation for my paper is to provide some recommendation for many markets, so including the market that I mentioned in the previous slide, but also many others like airline upgrades, because some airline companies use contract term in order to allocate something. And my paper contributes to two main literature in the matching, which is first to study the set of stable allocation with contracts. And here the papers that I mentioned try to find some condition on the preference of agents that guarantees the existence of a stable allocation. The second literature that I mentioned is designing contracts in a matching framework. So the paper here study choice function in order to improve the welfare of agents on the market. And to my knowledge, there is no paper in the literature that studies the impact of adding or withdrawing some terms on the welfare of agents. But what we know from the literature, and by standard matching literature, I mean the marriage program introduced by Gale and Shapley, on which we have on one side men, on the other side women. What we know is that in general, when we have opportunities, it is beneficial for agents. So the first result that I mentioned by Gale and Sotomayor states that, okay, on the marriage program, on one side we have men, on the other side we have women. If we had a woman in the market, then each man quickly prefers a new man-optimal stable matching. And by man-optimal stable matching, I mean the stable matching that is preferred by each man. So yeah, the intuition behind this result is that by adding a woman, then each man has more potential partner and face less competition for given one. That's why we have a welfare improvement. And I mentioned the second result by Ross and Sotomayor that states that if the added woman is not single at any stable matching, then for some men, they strictly prefer the new man-optimal matching. So a spoiler, in my paper, I found that it is not the case with contract terms, meaning that by adding some contract terms, we can shrink the set of stable allocation, and this have an impact even on the doctor optimal stable allocation. And by offering more terms, we can observe a welfare reduction for doctor. So knowing this result, a new question is, okay, when we had some terms, we have a welfare reduction for doctors. But is it possible to find a method such that by withdrawing some terms, we improve their welfare? And the answer is yes. And in this presentation, in the first part of the presentation, I will show you how it is possible. So I can now introduce my model. So for those who are familiar with the matching with contracts model, it's very similar. So I consider a finite set of doctors, hospital, and terms. Altogether, they constitute a set of contracts, big X. And to each contract X, only one doctor, only one hospital, and only one term are associated. So I do not write XD, the doctor who is associated to contract X, and XH for the hospital, XT for the. And the main difference in my model is that to each hospital, I associate a subset of them that I call a subset of available terms. So basically, it represents the set of terms that can be offered to doctors by a given hospital. So here, take hospital H, consider a set of terms that it can offer TH. If a term T is in TH, it means that a contract that concerns hospital H and term T is available for any doctor. In contrast, if T is not in TH, then there is no doctor that can have this contract with hospital H.
Could I have a clarifying question, because it's not my field? So your analogy with the attractive marriage market is not exactly precise because there are no terms there.
Yeah, there are no terms. But
here it would be, the analogy would be to adding a hospital that benefits all.
Yeah, if in fact my point was more about adding some opportunities, but you are right. If we had some hospital, in fact, we go back to the Gale and Shapley scale.
Nice. Thank you. And, okay, thank you.
But yeah, you are right, and thank you to mention it. My point is only on offering more options.
Sure.
And yeah, for any hospital, I assume that they can offer at least one term, so the set of available term is non-empty, otherwise there is no contract that concerns this hospital that is available, and the hospital is irrelevant. And I define a vector of terms, so it's a vector of sets, which represents to each element of this vector, it associates to a hospital, and it represents the set of available terms as that. And then I consider strict preference for doctors, so over the sets of terms, of contracts, sorry. But of course, each Dr. D will have preference over the contract that concerns this Dr. D. And same for hospital, but here I consider the subset of contract because it's a many-to-one framework. That's why hospital can have a bundle of contracts, while doctor can have only one contract. And I denote the weak preference of doctors with a standard. So for a set of contracts X prime, I denote by X prime D the set of contracts that concern Dr. D. So basically, when I mention the preference, Dr. D only has preference over the set X prime D. And a set of contracts is an allocation if in this set of contracts, each doctor is concerned by at most one contract. So as I said, it's a many-to-one. And I had the second condition, which is a feasibility condition, like in any term that is used in the allocation X prime, then the term is available at a given time. I have a problem, and in this paper and through the presentation, I will fix everything except the set of available terms. So I fix the set of doctors, hospital, and the preference. And I only change the vector of terms. So I can simply denote the problem by height. To determine which allocation is chosen by agents, I use choice function. So I hope these choice functions are intuitive. So for doctors, the choice function simply consists in you have a set of terms and you will choose your preferred, you have a set of contracts, sorry, and you choose your preferred contract in this. For hospital, is more or less the same thing, but here you choose your preferred subsets of contract because it's a many-to-one, and we must add the condition that each term is available at this given hospital, and each doctor is concerned by at most one contract. So it's only to stick to the definition of an allocation. And then to consider the allocation, I take the union of all the contracts chosen by doctors and all the set of contracts chosen by us. Right? So the main point of matching in general is the stability property. So here the definition is a bit different because it's used choice function, but in fact we can find again the original definition. So I said that an allocation X prime is stable if it is individually rational. So meaning that among this set, there is no doctors nor hospitals that have an incentive to reject a contract, meaning that it is individually rational, all the contracts are acceptable for agents. And the second point is that there is no hospital that are concerned by another allocation X double prime that will block allocation X prime. So this is a bit tricky here with just functioning, but it's just blocking allocation. And I define the set of stable allocation for problem pi t by S pi t. And I make one assumption, which is that contracts are substitute for hospital. So by this, I mean that there is no complementarity between contracts for hospital. So if we consider a set of contracts, if one contract in this set is not chosen by the hospital, then by adding more options, more contracts, then this term will still be not. And when we have this condition, from the literature and the paper by Hatfield and Milgram, we know that for any given term of vector, the set of stable allocation is non-empty and form a lattice. So in this presentation, I will mainly focus on the two extreme points of the lattice, so the doctor optimal stable allocation and the hospital optimal stable allocation. And in addition, the doctor proposing DA, so deferred acceptance, generates the doctor optimal stable allocation. So I will not introduce DA here, but in this example, I will show you how is it possible. And yeah, I denote by X upper bar the doctor optimal stable allocation and X lower bar the hospital optimal stable. Okay, so I can now introduce an example. And I decide to choose an example in which I consider transfers, so salaries in this case, but it is possible to construct another example by using other terms instead of salaries. So in this example, I have 2 doctors, 2 hospitals, and 3 possible terms that are salaries for doctors. So a salary of 90, 100, and 100. If I go back if I go directly to the preference, because it's salary, I assume that doctor will prefer for a given hospital a higher salary, while it is the opposite for hospital. For a given doctor, they will prefer the lowest possible salary. And in the preference of Dr. D1, so here, we can see that there is no contract that concerns Dr. D1 hospital H2 that is acceptable to D1. That's why I will not write here in the preference of hospital H2 that a contract is. And same for Dr. D2. D2 accepts to work for hospital H1 only if her salary is 110, meaning that a salary of 90 or a salary of 100 is unacceptable to her at H1. That's why I will not write here the preference, the contract with Dr. D2 and a salary of 90 and a salary of 100. But otherwise, it should be somewhere here, preferred to a salary of 100. So let's consider a first problem in which hospital H1 can only offer a salary of 90 and 100, while hospital H2 can only offer a salary of 100. Meaning that the contract in light gray are impossible, they are not available, so I can forget for the moment. If I run DA at the first step, each doctor will propose their preferred contract to the hospital that is concerned. So Dr. D1 proposed this contract to H1 with a salary of 100, and Dr. D2 proposed this contract to H2 with a salary of 100. These 2 contracts are acceptable, so DA stops at the first step. And the doctor optimal stable allocation is here given. Now suppose that we have a new problem in which hospital H1 can offer an additional salary, which is 110. So we add a new salary, we increase because we had a new salary which is higher. Now we have the full table. Each doctor proposed their preferred contract to H1, here 110. We can see that D2 with 110 is preferred to D1 with 110. So D1, the contract is rejected. We consider the second preferred contract by D1, but this contract is still less preferred than D2 with 110. So D1, we consider the third preferred contract, which is H1 with a salary of 90, which is now preferred to D2 with a salary. So yeah, the new doctor optimal stable allocation is here given in red. So by adding a new term, which is a higher salary, and we are still considering the doctor optimal stable allocation, well, we can see that D1 is working. And the intuition behind this example is that by adding this new salary, this creates a competition among doctors because they both want this term. And this competition forces Dr. D1 to accept a lower salary to have a job, to stay. And maybe some of you may wonder if, what happens if the term is used? Because here we can see that the salary of 110 is not used by doctors. But even if the term is used, I consider a new example in which I have 3 doctors, 3 hospitals, same story. I consider salary here 100 and 110. Once again, hospital H1 can only offer a salary of 100. Hospital H2 and H3 can also offer only 100. So if H1 can only offer 100, then we can forget all the contracts that are in light gray. DA stop as the first step. The allocation is given in blue. And now H1 can offer 100 and 110. And the new doctor optimized allocation is given in red. So even if the new term is preferred by doctor, we can still have a welfare reduction. And here, the term is used by D2. So here is an intuition. Yeah.
Sorry, just you are here only focusing on the preferences of doctors, right? So you cannot improve for both doctors and hospitals.
No.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, here the intuition is that there is a competition between D1 and D3, while D2 mainly care about H2. And due to the competition between D1 and D3, D2 is forced to accept a less preferred contract. Even if the salary is higher, D2 prefer H2 with a salary of 100 to H1 with a salary of 100. All right, I can introduce my first theorem. So for some problem with this structure, so I have a problem, I expand the set of terms that is offered by one hospital, then I can have an empty set of doctors that strictly prefers the new doctor optimized algorithm. And the second part of the statement is that if we have some doctors which are worse off, then some hospitals are better, or their allocation is strictly preferred. So if I illustrate here, so D1 and D2 are worse off when we compare blue and red, but H1 and H2 prefer the allocation in red. So to prove this is pretty easy. You can just use the lattice structure and the definition of stability. And the second statement is related to the fact that when we had a woman, if the term is used, if a woman is not single, then we have an empty set of men that strictly prefer the new man optimized allocation. Well, here it is not the case with term, and the proof of the statement is basically the precursor. So for the rest of the presentation, I will mainly focus on 3 questions, but I partially answer the first question. So how is it possible that this term, when we had some terms, it impacts the welfare of doctors? And here I use more a mathematical approach rather than some economic interpretation. Then I will study the preference domain in which it is not the case. So which condition we must impose on hospital preference to guarantee that when we have some terms, it will never impact, at least negatively, the welfare of doctors. And finally, I will study the incentives for hospital in offering a service. But let's first present my approach. So here, I already defined a problem, but now I introduce a sub-problem. What I mean by sub-problem is that is in fact a problem which is very similar to the original problem. Consider 2 problems like H T prime and H T and pi T, sorry. Then they have the same set of doctors, same set of hospitals, same preference for hospital and doctors. And for all the hospitals, they have the same set of available terms, except for one hospital. So basically, for the sub-problem here, I consider that T prime is a subset of terms that is available for hospital H in my problem. So we can think as follows. We have a problem which is a sub-problem. I expand the set of terms for only one hospital, and I have my main problem. But we can have also the opposite reasoning. I have my problem. I withdraw some term for one hospital, and I have my sub-problem. So the first observation here is lemma 1, but in fact, it can be an observation. The first observation is that if an allocation is stable in a sub-problem, and if I extend the set of terms offered by only one hospital, if the allocation is no longer stable in the main problem, then it means that among the terms that I had, some contracts are now available, and this constitutes a blocking application. And in fact, this can be useful to generalize a bit to any problem and any subproblem. So here, I designed a particular problem and two subproblems. So this is two subproblems here of the main problem here, in which in each of these subproblems, I consider a subset of available terms, such that the union of these two sets is the set of terms that are available in the main problem. So I decompose the sets of available terms of the main problem in two subproblems. But I didn't impose some restriction about how to decompose this, just the union of the two must be perfect. Then this pretty ugly thing happened, which is if an allocation is stable in both subproblems, then by construction, it will also be stable in the main problem. So if you consider, for instance, a graph, if you have two graphs, you consider the union of the set of stable allocation, then as by construction, you didn't have other hedges, then you always have the same allocation, which are stable in both. And by using lemma 1, this part is maybe more interesting from a welfare perspective, because it states that if an allocation is stable here, then the allocation will also be stable here, or both. So it means that if an allocation is stable in the main problem, I can always find a sub-problem in which the allocation will also be stable. And this directly leads to my next theorem, in which I had a new condition. So consider an allocation in the main problem, which is stable. If under this allocation, we have hospital H that has one term that is not used, we can withdraw it, and we obtain a sub-problem in which allocation is still stable. So it can be reformulated using a property of irrelevance of non-used term for stable allocation or something similar. And this is interesting from a welfare perspective because we can have the same reasoning with the doctor optimal stable allocation, right? If we consider a problem, we consider the doctor optimal stable allocation of that problem. If some hospital has some terms that are not used, we can withdraw it. We obtain a sub-problem in which the allocation will still be stable. And it means that in the sub-problems that we have, the doctor optimal stable allocation will be weakly preferred to this one. So if I illustrate with example 1, consider that my problem is in the case where H1 offers a salary of 90, 100, and 110. The allocation is given in red. A term that is not used is 110. I can withdraw it, and I go back to the allocation in blue. So by withdrawing some terms that are not used, I can have a Pareto improvement for topic. Okay, so I answered my first question, but now I study the preference domain. So is it possible to find some restriction on the preference of hospital that will avoid this phenomenon? And that's what I will try to answer here. So I first studied the preference, the lexicographic preference domain. So I guess you are all more or less familiar with lexicographic preference, but just to remind something and to apply it to contracts. So I said that the preference of hospital are doctor lexicographic if when we have two contracts, so X and X prime, that concern the same doctors, there is no other contract, X double prime, that concern another doctor, such that X prime is preferred, is less preferred than X double prime, and X is preferred to X double prime. So in the context of salaries, it's a bit unrealistic, maybe, because it means that for a given hospital, the hospital will only always prefer to hire a specific doctor without taking into account the salary, rather than hiring another doctor. So yeah, it's pretty unrealistic, but it's the part of my critique. And I consider the same thing for doctors. And I introduce a notation. So here, I'm not sure about my notation. If you have some recommendation, don't hesitate to suggest me something, but it represents the sets of doctors which are hired by hospital H under allocation X. So it's basically the workforce of hospital H under allocation X. Okay, so my lemma 2 is here and simply state that if each hospital has doctor lexicographic preference and each doctor has hospital lexicographic preference, then when we had sub terms for a given hospital, the same sets of doctors are hired by it. And the intuition is that as the first criteria to choose their contract is doctors, when we had some terms, it will not change this rank, right? And this lemma 2 allow me to use a weaker condition for my theorem 4. So for any problem such that the preference of hospital are lexicographic, meaning that I don't impose any condition on the preference of doctors, if I expand the set of terms that is offered by one hospital, then if the hospital hires the same set of doctors, I can guarantee that there is no doctor that are worse. And if one of the terms that is added is used, then I know that there is at least one doctor which is better. Meaning that by combining lemma 2 and theorem 4, at least the first statement of theorem 4, I go back to the result from the standard literature, which is if doctors has, each doctor has lexicographic preference, each hospital has lexicographic preference, adding a term will always weakly improve the welfare of doctors. So I must impose very strong conditions because lexicographic preference are very strong, it's not realistic. But I must impose very strong function to guarantee that when I add some terms, no doctor are.
Yes. I just wanted to mention that in, we have this paper with Banshore and others where we actually also have this lexicographic assumption. So where we have universities choosing students with contracts, where the contracts can mean whether a student has to pay a tuition fee or not. So in fact, if this tuition or the state grant is not paid by the university, but actually coming from the government, maybe the universities, they don't care much about, whether some students are getting grant or not. They are more concerned about, which students they are admitting and not about the terms. So this was also our assumption. Essentially, I just realized the very thing. Anyway, so I will actually have to understand what is the consequence in our setting. So maybe this means that in that specific choice function, the students cannot be heard if there is a new term, new contract possibility.
For instance, a partial founding from the university.
Yeah. No, this is interesting.
Then, as I said, this domain is not very realist. So I study another domain, which is continuous preference. So basically, continuous preference can be with salaries. We have here, for instance, okay, I will define it. So I use this notation to state that for a given hospital, each doctor prefers this contract, so with term T, to the one with T prime. And I said that the preference of doctor are continuous if it is the case for any hospital. So to illustrate with salary, for a given hospital, each doctor will prefer a higher salary rather than low salary. And this is the same for hospital. Everything clear? And I can state my theorem 5, which is when for any problem such that the preference of hospital are continuous, the preference of doctors are continuous. If I had some terms here, I must impose 3 conditions. The first one is that one of the terms that is added is used. The second one is that the same set of doctors is hired by the hospital. And the third one is that each term that is added is preferred to any term that was available. Okay. So it's a bit abstract maybe, but these conditions are very strong. And the consequence of these 3 conditions is that at least one doctor is better off. So meaning that we can still have some doctors which are worse. So to illustrate my point, if you remember in my first example, so hospital H1 offer a higher salary. So condition 3 is satisfied. The same set of doctors was hired. So only Dr. D1 was hired before with a salary of 100 and after adding the new term with a salary of 90. So this is satisfied. But the term is not used. Meaning that condition 2 and 3 are satisfied, but not the first. In my second example, it was the opposite. The new term that is added is preferred because it's higher salary. And the term is used, but the doctor who are assigned to that hospital are different. Remember, it's Dr. D2 who was before assigned to hospital H2, who is now working at H1. And even if I impose such a condition, we can still have some doctors which are worse, but we know that one of the doctors is better. So the intuition behind this presentation is that to guarantee that no doctor are worse off, we must impose very strong conditions on either the preference domain or the matching that we obtain. So the first with lexicographic preference is unrealistic, as I mentioned, because agents will care about the terms that are used. And the second one is that we must impose a strong condition to guarantee that at least one doctor is better off. But I can argue that in the context of salary, if we have the 3 conditions that are satisfied, then the hospital is worse. Remember, the first condition is that the adding term are preferred to the already existing term. So they offer higher salary. They hire the same set of doctors, and at least one of the doctors use a new salary. So basically, the hospital is hiring the same set of doctors, but some of them receive a higher salary. It is clear that the hospital is worse. And yeah, so even if we impose such a condition, we are in a setting in which it's not obvious that the hospital will accept to offer such a salary. Because if he knows that he will hire the same set of doctors, he will never have the incentive to offer or higher salary. And yeah, in the last part, I studied the incentive of hospital. So the question here is, does a hospital prefer its allocation if its set of terms is expanded? So from the previous slide, it is clear that it's not always the case, at least for the doctor optimized level allocation, because we can have some hospitals which are worse. But when we consider the hospital optimal stable allocation, well, as it offers more term, it is intuitive that using a graph, for instance, if you have some ages with only one hospital, when we consider the hospital optimal stable allocation, the hospital will be weakly better. And if one of these terms is used, then the preference is strict. So it means that if we are in a setting in which we have a mechanism that generates the hospital optimal stable allocation, then each hospital will have the incentive to expand the set of terms because they are. And when I mention incentives, I can define a strategy. So here I define a strategy in which the preference of hospitals are fixed for two reasons. The first one is to capture the incentives for hospital in offering terms only. And the second idea behind this is that it can be used in some markets. For instance, in school choice, the preference of school are fixed, but they can still offer a set of terms to students. So this reasoning can maybe be applied in some other markets. And well, it is clear that according to the examples that I introduced, they can manipulate. For instance, hospital H1 in the first example offer a higher salary to doctors, and this salary is not used. But because it's not used, we can say that this term is unacceptable for the hospital. And it can misreport this set of available terms by offering some terms that are maybe not available because we know that it will not be used. And in that sense, the hospital will be better. So hospital can manipulate when I consider the doctor proposing deferred acceptance mechanism. Manipulate only by changing their set of reporting their set of available terms. So to conclude, in this paper, I study the impacts of adding contract term on the welfare of doctors. And I show that by adding some contract term, it may create some competition among doctors that may reduce their welfare. And one method that I suggest is to withdraw some terms that are not used, so shrink the set of terms that I offer by hospital to have a weak Pareto improvement. Then I study the preference domain, and what I show is that we must impose very strong conditions to guarantee that if a term is added and is used, some doctors are better. So these conditions are not realistic, or at least economically very strange. And I can argue that my results are robust and can be used in a wide range of markets. And finally, I study the incentives for hospital, and what I show is that hospital always have the incentive to offer more terms, to extend the set of terms that they offer when mechanism generates the hospital optimal stable allocation, and they can manipulate when we consider the DA, the doctor proposing DA. Thank you for your attention.
One comment and one question to begin with, then others can. So yeah, you are saying unrealistic. You never know. So I mean, I just said that in the Hungarian case, if the contract term is very important for the students because they either receive a grant or not. But sometimes the money is coming from the government, so the universities actually don't care much whether some students will get a grant or not. What is most important for the universities, whether they get the best students or not. Anyway, so maybe you can be a bit.
Maybe I should reformulate them.
Yeah, in the hospital resident case with private markets, it's unrealistic, but actually for state hospitals, again, I would question whether this is unrealistic because maybe state hospitals, again, they don't care if they spend more money on the doctors. from the government money, but they get better doctors. Anyway, the other is a question. I don't. I'm a bit surprised. I mean, if your last results from this hospital optimality, so the previous slides, but in your examples, everything was a one-to-one example, no?
Yes, but it's exactly the same thing in many to one set.
Yeah, I'm just asking that. I'm surprised that you have different, but maybe I misunderstand something. So adding a new contract was.
Okay, so to present it differently, in this example, we have only, so in this example, we have only two stable allocations, the one in blue and the one with H190 and D190,
Yes.
which is the hospital optimal stable allocation. By offering this new term, in fact, it shrinks the set of stable allocation by only, and now we only have the hospital optimal stable allocation. But here the term is not used. So we have a weak strict preference for hospital H1. No, considering the doctor optimal stable allocation, we have the same, so it's a weak preference because it will not change. But when the term is used, so in this example, once again, I have two stable allocations, so the one in blue and the one here, which is the hospital optimal stable allocation. And by offering a new term, H1 is better off because the term is used. And in fact, the the hospital optimal stable allocation was this one, and by offering a new term, we got this one. The one in red. So once again, we shrink the set of stable allocation, but this creates a new hospital stable allocation, which is
okay. So, but I mean, if we are just considering a one-to-one market, like in these examples, now perhaps the trick is with this unused term, because otherwise it should be somehow symmetric, like, you know, for one-to-one case at least. So first you consider, you know, the doctor optimal solution, then in your last theorem you consider the hospital optimal, and you say that you as I understood, you had different conclusions. No?
yeah, yes, because when from a doctor point of view, when hospital offer more terms, then you can be in competition with other doctors because the ages are coming from the hospital. While when you consider the point of view of hospital, the ages are coming from that hospital.
Okay. Okay, so this is with respect to one hospital.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I cannot state if other hospitals that have the same set of terms are better off or worse off.
Okay, okay.
So it's only for that precise. Sorry if it was unclear.
Okay. No, this is perhaps the detail that was important that I missed. Okay. Okay, thank you. So just clarification.
Yeah, it's only that hospital. Yeah.
Maybe related question. So you talk about doctors out there. I wonder when in practice these matching algorithms are used between doctors and hospitals. Is there a willingness on the planner side to really favor one side? Like, do they want to, in practice, favor doctors? Just if you know about this.
It can be, I think it depends on market, but yeah, for the medical residency program in the US, I think they use a similar model because each hospital can offer a set of terms, which is yes, some job in special service, and then each doctor rank their preference. So if we want to favor doctors, the policy implication would be to limit the number of terms that can be offered by doctors.
I understand. What I'm wondering is their willingness that they want to sometimes strictly prefer one side.
Usually there are strategic considerations, like if you compute the doctor optimal solution, then the doctors will have good incentive to submit their true preferences, and you don't really expect the hospitals to manipulate. Or in some settings like the Hungarian college admission, at the moment, at least this is the case, the universities cannot even manipulate, because these are the rankings are based on the scores essentially, so no choice is by the university, and that's why you only consider the strategic issues for the students' perspective, the university admission case. That's why usually it's students.
Yes, and now they can, because now they also do scores.
Now
They
actually,
can just get very low scores if they don't.
for master program, actually, there are, there might be some strategies by the university, but in fact, when we once tested this, what's the difference between the student optimal and college admission, college optimal solution, 2008, from the 19,000 students, there were only 2 students for whom the solution was different.
Really?
Yeah.
So close. Yeah.
And this is because, how the rankings are created based on the scores. It's not sure. Anyway, sorry, it's completely different.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that Monica wrote to everyone that we can be on all of this afternoon because of solidarity, or what I don't know what's happening now. Today is there a solidarity? Okay. Protest.